Our reading this morning is a poem by Carl Sandburg entitled, "Who Am I?" My head knocks against the stars. My feet are on the hilltops. My fingertips are in the valleys and shores of universal life. Down in the sounding foam of primal things, I reach my hands and play with the pebbles of destiny. I have been to hell and back many times. I know all about heaven, for I have talked with God. I dabble in the blood and guts of the terrible. I know the passionate seizure of beauty and the marvelous rebellion of man at all signs reading, keep off. My name is Truth, and I am the most elusive captive in the universe. My name is Truth, and I am the most elusive captive in the universe. Good morning, everyone. And thanks again for this opportunity to speak before this congregation. As a professional engineer and builder, retired, I am more comfortable constructing a building than I am in conjugating a verb or analyzing the symbolism and imagery of poetry. But I do, on occasion, encounter a poem that resonates somewhere deep within. A poem that perfects my understanding about our human existence, who and why we are. And so it was with that poem I read by Carl Sandburg. In 10 lines, I think he captured the essence of the challenge of knowing truth, of finding and comprehending what is and what is not reality. And he did so in enchanting and captivating poetic terms. Truth, he tells us, is all that was, all that is, and all that ever will be. Truth surrounds us, is within us, and yet we still cannot know it completely. As he says, paradoxically, it is both elusive and captive. Universal truth, that greater truth, that let's call it a truth with a capital T, transcends our human existence, and it alone embraces what was before our conscious being and what lies after. As Carl Sandburg said, down in the sounding foam of primal things, I reach my hands and play with the pebbles of destiny. As Unitarian Universalists, we search not only for those simple truths that guide us in our daily routines, to help us distinguish right from wrong or good from evil, but that universal truth from which all other truth evolves. We hope that gaining that knowledge might provide a clearer understanding of the meaning and purpose of our lives. Will we ever find it? I'm reminded of a story I heard many years ago about the corporate president who was having great difficulty getting straight answers from his corporate staff to simple true and false questions. They seem to equivocate and obfuscate on every issue. To get to the bottom of the problem, the president decided to ask just one question, the simplest possible question, and then evaluate and compare their individual responses. Seemed like a good idea. The question he asked was, is it true that 1 + 1 = 2? The director of marketing said, well, I think depending on the growth of the economy in the next quarter, that 1 + 1 could rise above its current modest level to somewhere above 2, blah, 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 blah. The corporate attorney answered, well, recent court cases have ruled that it may be 2 at this point, but we expect significant challenges by the errors, conclusive errors by the trial judge, and I would advise waiting until those court challenges are complete, yada, 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 yada. The corporate engineer answered, yes, 1 + 1 = 2. .0000000 plus or minus 0.0. Finally, frustrated and getting desperate, looking for the truth, the president went to the chief accounting officer, whom it was thought at last should be able to give a straight answer. So when asked, is it true that 1 + 1 = 2, the accountant looked and replied and said, let's see, what would you like it to be? Right? Now, one might say that the statement 1 + 1 = 2 is an axiom. That is, it's true. It's simply and obviously true, as plain as the nose on your face. It's intuitively obvious. You don't need to think about it a whole lot. If we could agree that 1 + 1 = 2, we could then prove that 2 + 2 = 4, and so on and so on. If we could agree, for instance, that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? Obvious. We could also define more complex geometries. Axioms served as starting points, as basic truths, foundations upon which we could then build. In our Unitarian Universalist faith, we have adopted certain axioms that serve us equally well. We accept them as true and as the foundation upon which we build our individual faith, even though we do not subject them to rigorous analysis or proof. They are called our 7 principles. And like 1 + 1 = 2, we can't prove that they are each true and correct, nor do we try. But we accept them because they strike us intuitively as being perfectly obvious, as plain as the nose on our denominational face. Inherent worth and dignity, the need for compassion, acceptance, freedom of inquiry, the interdependent web, etc., etc., etc. We UUs claim that we are not dogmatic. So what then are our principles? Are they any different than the articles of faith adopted by other religions? Are they true? Is it blasphemy if I suggest that I harbor a little doubt from time to time? What about that Hutu tribal leader in Rwanda in 1994, who played a key role in the slaughter of more than 500,000 Tutsi tribal members and was responsible for the rape and torture of thousands more? Do I believe that he has the same inherent worth and dignity as others? Or do we reserve worth and dignity only to those who think like we do and meet our moral and ethical standards? How about Osama bin Laden? When he was shot in the head by SEAL Team 6, did any of us think for a moment about his inherent worth and dignity? Is it necessary occasionally to move our principles further down the shelf to make room for pragmatism and practicality? Do justice and equity always leave room for compassion? Must we really love our enemies? Maybe our principles are all true. Or maybe they're just impractical under the pressures of living in the modern world. I wonder. These are vexing questions. But nonetheless, they are our axioms, our foundation. And like a mathematician, we build upon those axioms, those assumed but unproven truths, into increasingly broad and complex ideas like fair trade and peace activism, ethical eating, GLBT rights, environmentalism, compassionate caring, and the myriad of other activities in which we engage as expressions of our faith. Those axiomatic, unproven truths, our principles, help to steer us on what we believe is the right course through life. But even more, striving to live in accordance with those principles helps us to get a brief and teasing glimpse of reality. They permit us to peer through a tempting keyhole in the door of human limitations into the world of universal truth. that place where we are at one with and inseparable from the universe, and where love and compassion guide all human relationships with each other and with the world. Some religions or philosophies might call this a state of enlightenment. Are there times when you have felt it? Perhaps in a moment of deep contemplation or prayer, or maybe in the middle of your favorite hymn, or just being in the presence of a person whom you feel represents goodness. I described in my talk on transcendentalism a few months back that one brief occasion when I experienced that transcendency and thought I understood, if only for a brief moment, the true nature of good and the transforming capacity of universal love. In writing this talk, I could not help but recall the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in his final speech, the day before he was assassinated, describing what I interpret as his transcendent encounters with universal truth in the context of his Christian beliefs. Describing the threats that he had received, he called the source of those threats as being from sick white brothers. Not evil, not anything less than kinsmen, just broken. Then he goes on to say, and these were his final words, "I just want to do God's will." I almost feel terrible reading this because there's no way you could read this the way he spoke it. If you ever have an opportunity to watch that, it's amazing. He goes on to say, "I want to do God's will, and he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything," he said. "I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." Had he peeked through that keyhole? Had he seen truth? That story of the corporate president seeking an answer reveals the intrinsic problems in knowing the truth. That is, we are all burdened by prejudices, cultural differences, limitations in our senses and memory, difficulties of language and semantics and context, and most of all, our personal or collective ego, which separates us rather than unites us with the universe. Whenever and wherever our own personal untempered ego might take command, our desire to be right, to be judged favorably, to win, will sacrifice the truth on the altar of greed and self-righteousness. And now, as science delves even further into quantum physics, we learn that we can change reality by observing it. And that at the very core of the fabric of the universe, we are truly all one, and not separate as our ego suggests. Indeed, one might observe that quantum physics and the precepts of universal love appear to be coming into confluence. But perhaps this is a topic for another Sunday. So how can we ever hope to find universal truth when even simple truths are so elusive? I'd like to suggest today that the path to finding universal truth, that truth with a capital T, is through love, as Martin Luther King did, through love, by exercising your spiritual self. Now, we all know that love is an overworked, poorly defined, and very much abused word. So I'd like to define love as follows. Love is our spiritual being acting upon universal truth. Love is an intuitive and transcendent state that arises from deep within us, that understands the oneness of the universe and the interconnectedness of all things. You are that, and that is you. There is no separate being. It is said that all religions follow the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I thought about that, and I'd like to suggest my own, here's ego for you, my own restatement of that rule. As you do to all else, you do to yourself. All right? This is as close to universal truth that I've been able to come. It is this love that will guide us through life, with reason as its companion. One of our UU hymns says, and I'm not going to sing it, because if I sung it, I would drive you all out of here. One of our UU hymns says, on the road from greed to giving, love will guide us through the dark night. Remember that one? And the longer I've been a UU, the more I seem to understand these hymns. Beginning they were, oh, that's a hymn, I'll sing the words. But now, when you really look at the words sometimes, they're pretty amazing. And I thought about that one. On the road from selfishness to selflessness, from egocentrism to universalism, from ignorance to knowing, from self-deception to truth, love will show us the way. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, trust the instinct to the end, though you can render no reason. Well, I'm going to try and restate that one too in my own way. In your search for universal truth, follow your heart, and your brain will follow close behind. But let's leave spirituality for a moment and return to reason. I had a professor some 40 years ago in a course called Systems Analysis. Yes, I'm that old, 40 years ago in college, which had to do with ways of managing large amounts of information. It was a way of looking at all things in context, how everything was related to everything else, ecosystem, life support system, etc. He left me with two phrases that have followed me since then and have helped me in difficult times. The first was, it is better to be approximately correct than precisely wrong. That's great. A corollary of that might be, it is better to approximate the truth than claim to know it precisely. Right? As we attempt to state the absolute truth by eliminating doubt and uncertainty, to be precise in stating what we mean or what we believe, it seems we begin walking on very unstable ground, a quagmire, if you will, called dogma. It's better to be approximately correct and avoid the ego-driven temptations of dogma. The second thing he taught me, and this is true, he said, the answer to any proposition of truth is, well, it all depends. And like some parlor game, you can try it and find that it works very well, forcing you to open your mind to possibilities in response to any supposed truth. Well, it all depends. So what can we conclude about our search for truth? It seems we sacrifice the truth the moment we claim to know it with certainty. Absolute truth dies the instant it is born, unless we season our truth with a dash of doubt and approach truth probabilistically. As reading number 650, which we just read a few minutes ago in our gray hymnal notes, doubt is the attendant of truth and the servant of discovery. If we allow it to become absolute and beyond challenge, like our principles, truth then becomes a God. Absolute truth becomes a God. And as we create gods, our humanity is correspondingly lessened. As we become slaves to absolute truth, reason becomes irrelevant, and love and compassion lose their meaning. When we use our own truth to criticize the behavior of others, we're not acting in love, but in self-righteousness peppered with ego. Can you recall the story of doubting Thomas in the Bible? John chapter 20, verse 24 through 29. As the story goes, Jesus returned from the dead and appeared to the apostles with Thomas absent. They tell him about it, and he says, wait a minute, I was there. I saw the nail marks. I saw the spear wound in his side. I saw him die. I can't believe that he's alive. Sure enough, according to the Bible, Jesus appears to him with the wounds and reprimands him for not believing unless he sees. And that's what many religions require. They abandon the core beliefs of their founding prophets, like Jesus and the Buddha, and create new dogmatism, absolute creeds without foundation, casting out doubt, abandoning skepticism. They require you to accept what you know and what you feel within is not true, ignoring what your reason and intuition tell you. But our search for truth, our UU search for truth, is it a fool's errand? Are we setting ourselves up for failure, disappointment, and ridicule? If you were asked to go out and bring back truth, with what would you return? Some time ago, I was listening to Bill Nye, the science guy. I know a lot of you know him from public radio and TV. Bill Nye, the science guy, he was speaking before the American Humanist Association, addressing the problem of finding a truth that we can all accept. He said, instead of focusing on the truth, we should focus on the pursuit of it. We should focus on the scientific method, the way to find the truth, the use of skepticism and critical thinking. As Albert Einstein said, the search for truth is more precious than its possession. So in that light, I'd like to use a metaphor. That is, that our UU search for truth can best be characterized as scientific exploration, kind of like basic research in a laboratory. It's intended to fulfill humanity's insatiable desire to know and to understand what Carl Sandburg called our marvelous rebellion at all science reading keep off. Our search is not intended to prove any rigid hypothesis in particular, but rather to develop incrementally our own individual working hypothesis of truth. We are, each of us, each searcher for truth, like an archaeologist standing on the sands above what we believe is an enormous buried city, eager and excited to know what lies beneath. As we dig down, will we find the nature of our being, the purpose of our being, the nature of our spirituality, our role in eternity, and the meaning of our life during our life and after our death? As we dust off each layer, systematically removing particles of fear, bits of ignorance, chunks of prejudice, and the encrustation of dogma, we gather new interpretations, new meaning, and in small steps we get ever closer to that universal truth. We come to these services on Sunday seeking the tools for our work and for sharing ideas, but it is only our own effort, our own contemplation that will result in progress. No rabbi, no priest, no minister, no imam, no Buddha, no teacher or lay speaker can tell us what is the truth. The truth about life and its meaning comes from within, and each of us builds a unique truth based upon our reasoning and how our spirituality, our love, instructs us. Seems to me that the path to universal truth lies somewhere in that middle ground between instinct and reason, between transcendency and materialism, between subjectivity and objectivity, between irrationality and rationality. To ignore this search for truth is to suffer the consequences. We sacrifice our humanity and risk facing the end of our lives in ignorance, depression, desperation, and fear of death. I recall Martin Luther King at that last moment said, "I fear nothing." He said, I went to the top of the mountain, and now I fear nothing. I fear no man, he said. But knowing that we have lived our lives in a way that reveals meaning and purpose, however incomplete, but as best as we know it, we can acknowledge and accept our impermanence, and we can meet death knowing that we have not wasted this great gift of life, that we have lived a purposeful life. Buddhist philosophy has a phrase. It says, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha. I'm sure you've heard that before. I've heard many interpretations, but it certainly is not meant to be taken literally. It suggests that if on your path of discovery and learning, you meet a teacher who can claim to reveal to you universal truth, or if you think you've reached that enlightened state where you know that truth, then immediately erase the idea. It's just an illusion. I'm just finishing a book entitled, just finished it, The Hemlock Cup, Socrates, Athens, and the Search for the Good Life by Bettany Hughes. In it, she summarizes Socrates' philosophy this way. Know who you are inside. Know yourself through your relations with others. Understand yourself by loving those around you. Know that you know nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for that